Hello, my name is Maureen Baer, and I'm going to do a very short introduction to set the stage so you understand the real world problem that we've been working on. Then Ben Kickert is going to take you through all the Wolfram work. I'm going to keep my presentation part very short so that Ben has plenty of time to show you cool code. We've been looking at metrics and counting around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 5 years, and we've been using Wolfram and doing Wolfram presentations at the last 5 conferences, including this one, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and what counting is for them. For the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the year 2020 is the 5-year point in a 15-year strategic plan for the world. Though the actual results weren't on target, they were lagging their targets by around 3 years or so. By the 4-year point, the beginning of 2020, there was good data collection, it was getting somewhat standardized, and there were plenty of statistics and reports being produced. At last year's Wolfram conference, Ben showed you some of the ways we were combining Wolfram entities with UN data and bringing them together to look at maps and geo and other things like that. Then COVID happened. In real world results of what the estimates are for what COVID has done to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the reflection of what's happening in the world in terms of ending poverty, the Gates Foundation has estimated that the world will be set back by 10 or more years because of the effects of the pandemic. That would be poverty, healthcare, food security, education, pretty much anything that you can think of that makes the world a better place. From a data and statistics point of view, most country statistical offices are closed. Data collection has slowed almost to a stop. There had always been a lead lag of about a year in terms of collecting data and being able to understand trends. At this point, we're expecting that it's probably going to be 2 years at best before the formal data will be able to be collected again. So we decided pretty early on in April that we would start finding out as much as we could about where the new information was happening, both around COVID and looking at what was happening in terms of larger metrics for the world. Things like what was happening to poverty, what was happening to resources for health, et cetera. And we knew that we wanted to find ideally computational information, although there was no formal, Excel spreadsheet information available. So what we started to do after we did some, initial using Google search to see what terms people were doing, Ben and I decided that we would start using Wolfram to find information, to structure information, and to analyze it coming in. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Ben for the rest of the presentation, and he'll tell you more about how we've been using Wolfram.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate it. So as Maureen said, we're looking at ways that we can look at data that isn't going to be in a database. We just finished a presentation, so excuse me if my voice is a little bit hoarse, but we were just looking at how we can use images to create VR learning rooms. And so when you're dealing with the structure of visual information coming in, it's not nearly as easy to work with as what you would find with a database or a JSON query or things like that. So we're looking at 2 things. We're looking at unstructured data, particularly narrative, as Maureen said, being able to get new information coming in that we couldn't previously, but also visual information. How can we share the story? How can we see what information is there? How can we go beyond just a Google image search and actually make things better? So this presentation will be a bit more of a shotgun style approach where we'll look at 3 or 4 different things that we've done and ways that we have engaged. So we'll start very simple, looking at Google image search. We'll start adding some machine learning, some simple machine learning to that so that we can improve our results and the information that we're pulling in. Then we'll start looking at Twitter and how we can actually take Twitter and it not just be about finding people or seeing how many followers you have, but actually use it as a way to get a snapshot of what people are talking about and what is being deemed to be most important. Finally, we'll take a look at web session. So that we can look particularly at narrative data on how we can bring that in and analyze it. I did mention we just finished a VR session. There's not really any crossover between the two, but the two definitely do build on them. So you can see a quick screenshot of a VR room that we've created using some SDG data. And you can actually click the link above and go to the presentation from previously. So we're going to start with web image search. Very straightforward function. You put in a query, what do you want to know, and it'll give you as many images as you ask for. But it's when you actually start combining things and changing your heuristics that this becomes much more useful. And so to quickly share just a few of the things that we found to be useful, you can leverage this simple function into something a bit more robust. One of the things is just simply looking for Bing and Google results, and we'll show you a bit about how those results change. Making sure that we're including Boolean operators either within the Wolfram function or within the search query that we're using. We found that combining searches, both in terms of doing multiple searches that get combined, but also multiple search terms is always going to give a good result. A quick tip that we found out the hard way is particularly with your longer strings, wrapping that in search query string, even if you're not using any Boolean or other operators, generally provides results even if you were getting empty sets to start with. My recommendation is that if you're working with a lot of large files, that you go ahead and include image resize as you bring them in, because those files are stored locally. So I think that this notebook is about 60 megabytes, and most of what we're looking at is thumbnails. So doing your resize at the beginning can certainly help with that. And then also I'd say be willing to utilize the original APIs. Most of these service connects and web functions are operating on an API in the background. We've done a little bit of work, and particularly with things like Bing and article search, there are ways that you can search in those APIs that you simply can't within Wolfram. You can use Wolfram to do the search, but tie directly into the API. So just a couple quick examples. Simple web image search for the Sustainable Development Goals, which Maureen was talking about. We asked for 5, and you can see they're almost exactly the same. Not particularly useful to get 5 different iterations of the logos. But let's add a little bit of detail to that and ask for SDG results chart. And we're going to look in both Google and Bing. And so we see that we do have 2 that appear to overlap. It's good to know that, but that means that we're getting other inputs or other data points that are considered high quality by different search engines. So just doing those 2 searches and combining them is going to give us different results that are useful. An example of searching for 2 terms, we weren't interested in getting a lot of the same logo and diagrams. But if we say, or the same logos and outlines of the SDGs, but if we say SDG diagram, now we're getting a lot of new and different information. We can also combine multiple searches, which we talked about. So we're interested right now in COVID-19, renewable energy, virtual reality, impact investing, and Wolfram Mathematica. And so we can pull in 2 of each of those. If you were in the VR talk previously, this is a little bit more fleshed out version of how we were creating the data points for those VR rooms. Here we're actually using tuples to be able to pull in multiple aspects of the same search term. And so 3 of the SDGs that we focus a lot on are SDG 3, which is health, SDG 5, which is gender equality, and SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy. And so we wanted to pull in both the logo as well as the infographic. Again, this has a use for the VR rooms, but that's not the only thing. We can pull in multiple aspects of a single search term. But now when you pull it in, especially as you start dealing with larger sets of images, you find that you end up with a lot of stuff that just isn't that good. You know, we might get a nice picture of a local farmer in rural America, but that doesn't help us when we want to know about data. And so using very basic AI and machine learning functions, we've tried to look at ways that we can improve the information that's coming out. So that whether we're creating PDFs, whether we're creating archives of the information that's coming out, that we can sort and simplify the process of finding the best material. So here again, very straightforward web image search. We're asking for COVID trends. I'm just looking at the first 10, and all 10 of these look to be, probably pretty helpful for us, and we can utilize them. But we also know that within this set, we've got some advertisements, and we've got some logos, we've got some report covers that aren't particularly useful if we're wanting to actually digest and be able to look at this information. So using the FeatureNearest function, we can take all of those images that we've just pulled in and run the function and create this set to go off of. And then using that, what I've done is I've looked through my set and I've said that picture right there, that one looks to be very useful for me. I like this picture here. It's, you've got comparisons between countries, so let's try to get some more pictures like that. So I run the function and I say, give me all of the results. And so what this does is we're only working with 50, but if you were to have 500 of varying qualities, everything from, pictures of people's dogs to charts to, logos and advertisements, you want to be able to put them in a way that's most useful. So all we're doing here is we're saying this chart, I like that one. That one works well for me. So line them up most to least similar to that chart. And so as you can see, as you go down, all of these, we're dealing with a lot of multi-line charts. We start getting into some bar charts, which might not be what I want. We've got an infographic. We start changing some colors. We start getting into some of the geo mapping, which may be helpful to us, but isn't similar to what I've said. And we go all the way down to our insurance industry trends that you should know and a lady with an umbrella. So rather than having to flip through pages of options, this allows you to sort most to least similar in images and say, you know what, we're gonna take all of those out, delete those, and it's gonna be our new data set. If you're dealing with more diverse sets where there's multiple types of images that would be useful, you can use the find clusters function. In this case, we end up with a very large cluster of charts similar to what we want. As we get down to the bottom, you start seeing that a lot of these, you've got your maps here, which may or may not be useful to you, and you can start pulling in and out of clusters. So using a single function on your image sets, it allows you to process through what's happening. So if you're interested in what's happening in COVID-19 and trends, this is a great way to start. If you're starting, you're starting a vacation planning, you can pull up related images along that way as well. So that's images. That's the very straightforward visual approach to what we're doing. Next, I want us to take a look at Twitter. And if you've been to any of our talks at previous sessions, Twitter is something we've used quite a bit in a lot of different ways. We've used it to track our effectiveness in engagement. We've used it as ways to find new followers and people that we should be listening to. But here we want to use Twitter as a way of getting a very timely snapshot of what people are talking about around a topic. So using the Twitter Service Connect and putting in a tweet search with a query SDG data, we can pull in all the details that we need about SDG data and the tweets that have come in. So if you're wanting to structure something as unstructured as Twitter, this does it for you with a single function. But we start to see that we've got some issues. So for instance, here we see that this is the exact same tweet. It's just been retweeted, but we're not getting any new information. I can't really scroll in presentation mode, but if you go over to the far right, you'll see that a lot of these tweets have no engagement. And so they might be relevant to what we're talking about, but they're not getting the traction. People aren't really engaging with those, and so they might not be the best indicator of what people are resonating with. But what we can do just by bringing that in is we can get a visual snapshot on a topic that we're interested in. So within SDG data, what are people talking about, the general populace? Here we see a lot of discussion about currency and money and values and transactions. And I know because I looked it up that there's actually a conference going on now that's looking at gender equality and wage gap. And so a lot of people who are talking about SDG data today are talking about what's happening at that conference. If we look at who's being mentioned and who's being talked about, we see the UN Data Forum. And so if I had forgotten that it's coming up in 2 weeks, I can be reminded that, oh yeah, that's something important coming up, so let's pay attention to it. We see the Mo Ibrahim Foundation is being mentioned a lot. They are well known for putting out reports on African governance and leadership. And so most likely we can infer that something new has come up from them that maybe we should pay attention to. So those are kind of the straightforward searches. But what we found is that doing searching, whether it's through web image search, whether it's through regular web search, wiki data, that a lot has to do with how you're structuring your query. And it's much more art than science. A lot of iterations to get to places where we can say this is giving us the picture that we want. When we're talking about Twitter, one of the things we found to be most useful is actually working within Twitter's query system and doing a lot of filtering before you even get to the tweets coming into Mathematica. And so I've given you 3 options here. The Twitter Advanced Search is kind of a GUI that you can interact with. And when you click search, it'll give you the query up at the top that you can then import into your Twitter search as the query. The actual developer documentation will give you some operators that you can use. And then just an independent website that lists quite a few hidden search operators that can make for a more powerful search experience. So in this case, before we just searched for SDG and data, now we're going to start working with some of our Boolean commands, and we're going to say, there's a lot of terms that can be related to the SDGs. And so we want SDGs, we want global goals together, we want sustainable development. HLPF is the high-level political forum, and the UN Data Forum are 2 events that talk exclusively about what we're interested in. So find any tweet that talk about that and that are mentioning data and stats and targets and reports. And then to make sure we're getting the best data possible, we want language being English. I'm embarrassed to say that is my only language of competency. We want to filter out any of the native retweets so that we don't get duplicates as people are retweeting the same information. As a way of vetting our results, we only want tweets that have been retweeted at least twice or favorited at least twice. And so we found in some of our earlier studies, we would end up with some very off-the-wall tweets that had nothing to do with this, buy Bitcoin, Elon Musk and Tesla wants to give you $1,000, all that stuff. This allows us to bypass that. Once it comes in, we go ahead and do a reverse sort by the amount of engagement. And so here, we now have a more simplified and straightforward understanding of what people are talking about and on topic that we've decided. Again, if you look at a word cloud, just for a quick visual understanding, you see that this is much more focused. We have global goals and SDGs. That's what we're interested in. We might not be getting the broad look at what's happening, but we know that what's coming in is related to what we're interested in. To add, and again, tying into what we can either do with a VR learning room or what you can do with other sorts of reports, is we actually want to focus a little bit more on images. And so one of the filters that we've recently started using is that you can filter and only bring in tweets that have images associated with them. So if you're interested in a conference, the Wolfram Technology Conference, for instance, you can do a WTC search that only returns images. So if Seth Candler has a picture of a screenshot from last night at the keynote, you can bring that in. So here we're going to do the initial search. We're going to tweak our Service Connect command by simply adding elements and images. So for all of those tweets that we found, only bring in the images. And so it's a straightforward way of doing it. This next section I'm going to run through because it's pretty specific to our work and the way that we do things. But sometimes you want to visualize a tweet. Data sets are great if you want to have structured information and be able to search. But sometimes simply seeing it is a better way to work. And so what we've done is we actually want to look at ways to take a quick snapshot of what those tweets are. You can use the web image function, which is very straightforward. It essentially opens up the website, takes a snapshot of what's there, and sends it back to you. Unfortunately, when we started implementing this, particularly with Twitter, we found that there's some errors with it. So here you can see the tweet was not fully loaded, and so it's partially grayed out. And in fact, about half of our tweets hadn't even showed up by the time that they were there. But luckily, you can use a web session, and you can recreate that exact same process and add your own steps to it. So in this case, we've created a defined function where we're going to open up the URL that we're interested in. We are going to set the window size And so this took some trial and error, but we can find out what's the optimal size so that we're not truncating our tweets, but we're also not ending up with too much information on the left, right. Then we can pause for 1 second to ensure that the website has time to load, and then finally take a capture page command with web execute to return that image. And so for here's an example of 10 of the tweets. I'll show you what this would look like if we use it in a VR room. But if you're more of a visual learner, you might, you're jumping on a plane and you want to, give me the 500 most interesting tweets on my topic. Download all the images, and you can read them while you're on the plane. We're going to crop the images, make them work a little bit better. And what we have here is the VR hallway. And I can actually bring that up for you as a tie into our previous work. So again, if you were a visual learner, this would work on a VR headset. So instead of being on your phone on Twitter, you can walk through a hallway and look at the tweet. So if the placement of things resonates with you and helps you remember it, you have that as an option. Obviously, you can also export that as a PDF, which we discussed. And we've gotten a little bit more into automating our reports coming out of this. So for instance, we'll take a search that we know is effective, and we'll set it as a cloud deployed scheduled task. And so every day, I think this comes in for me like 9 o'clock in the morning, the Wolfram cloud is going to run a tweet search, and then it's going to send me the data set so that I can include it. We've also worked with data bins so that you can collect information over time and you can track trends. We've used this to create a Twitter retweet bot. So if you go to SDGCounting at Twitter right now, you'll see that we have a lot of activity, but because we've been busy preparing for these presentations, we haven't been doing it, the original tweeting. And so everything that's coming out is the result of our Twitter retweet bot. We've mentioned daily summary reports, and we're also looking at ways that you can auto-generate articles in a news source like Medium, which is a cross between a blog and Twitter for quick information sharing. Now, we've already touched on a little bit about how web session can be used. Here, we want to take that idea of what is narrative and how can we move narrative into a more structured approach. So again, using Medium as a lot of citizen journalism happens on Medium. We can open up a web session in Chrome. We can open up the website for the search for COVID-19 data statistics to see what the most recent articles related to COVID-19 data statistics are. Using web execute with our web session and identifying our CSS selectors, we can have Wolfram go in and find all of the titles, take a quick look, and we can say, yeah, those we're interested in stats and COVID. That looks good to me. One more bit of code that I want to give credit to from Swish on Stack Exchange. This is probably one of the most useful web session add-ins that I've come across. It allows you to extract additional information from a web object that you've identified. And so, for instance, if you've identified an image or a link within an image, or you've identified the image, and you want to find out what is the href within that, this allows you to set that attribute. So for us, we know that we have a division that points to an A tag, and we want to extract the href argument that's within there. And so what that does is it allows us to get all of the links for the 10 articles that we've identified previously. Now, I won't go through the specifics, but I will mention a few things in terms of our overall import process. One of the things we ran into with Medium is that it doesn't auto load the page. You have to scroll down and then it'll load, and you scroll down some more and it will load. And so we've included some code in our define function that will automatically scroll down so that we can ensure that the entire page has loaded. Then we can bring in our title, do some pre-processing on date, pull in the full text, the headings, subheadings, what people are putting into bold, what tags were used, what internal links are in the article, what the embedded files are, and then do some cleaning up at the end. And so here we have now taken what is citizen journalism in a very unstructured and narrative way, and now we have a whole data set that we can either do analytics on, or we can use it to store, again, to look at trends, take a look at the tags that are people being used. But if you are a visual learner and more of a summary type person, one of the things that we've done is to take the essential information. So if you have a new article that you don't know how interested you're going to be in it, you're going to look at the title, you're going to look at the headings, you're going to look at what the block quotes are, and you're going to look at what people are putting into bold. And so this then gives a quick snapshot of every page coming in. Maureen's talked about national statistics offices already. And so just by glancing at this, rather than having to go through each individual website, you get that snapshot. And so I know that that's probably an article that I'm going to want to read. Again, all of this can be automated. You could have a report of the most recent and useful information delivered straight to your email or put into another source. So my conclusion, I think we've covered most of what we've talked about. I think that when you're looking at unstructured data, oftentimes it involves a lot of trial and error and a lot of figuring out how things can be structured so that they're useful. It often requires a different way of learning. I do like my tables and my rows and my columns, but sometimes having more of the quick snapshot is a better way of doing that. In terms of our next steps, things that we're wanting to do with this, this was brought about because of COVID. That certainly affected the way that we've had to learn, but it's something that will be useful into our topics as we continue. So the next thing we want to do is to explore more automation with the machine learning. So you saw that it was still a very hands-on process to decide what images were most relevant. We want to make that a little bit more automated. We want to include text recognize functionality on some of the image outputs so that we can include other data points. Continue to expand on the use of AI functionality. What we shared today was relatively straightforward, but we want to expand that into some of the neural nets that are available through the repository. And finally, this is kind of our gold standard that we're wanting to achieve, is to be able to take a lot of these UN PDF reports, be able to extract the relevant graphics as well as the information that is in there. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I have, it looks like 2 minutes. I will stick around after this ends to answer any of the questions that that comes up on the chat. I'm not sure I'm going to do a good job reading through them and trying to answer on the fly. So let me end it there. Thank you, Maureen, for the introduction and for the drive to get a lot of this work completed. We appreciate you coming and attending the session. We will upload our notebook for you to use and dig through into our Pathable account, so feel free to find it there and reach out to us with any questions that you may have or anything that we can assist with, or vice versa, things that you might be able to help us with. We would appreciate that. So thank you all for your time, and have a great afternoon.
And there are a couple of questions that came in through Pathable, and we'll be sure to get back to you, Chase, particularly. I think you had a couple of questions. And for me also, thanks everybody for attending.
Appreciate it.